Welcome to another edition of Moxie Talk, where we give you an intimate look into the courage, character, and defining moments of today's most inspiring individuals. I'm Kurt Jacobs, host of Moxie Talk, where previous guests have included leaders from the world of politics, business, culinary, sports, entertainment, art, law, community activism, and philanthropy. Today, our 362nd guest in our series, we welcome Tom Williams. He's a partner with Stoll Keenon Ogden, PLLC. And for those of you who don't know our guest, allow me to read some of Tom's backstory. Tom is a member of the Kentucky law firm of Stoll Keenon Ogden, where he has legal practice focusing in management-side labor and employment law. Multiple times he has been recognized as one of the top 50 lawyers in the Commonwealth of Kentucky by super lawyers. Tom was a founder of Restorative Justice Louisville. He has also served as president of the Louisville Bar Association and board chair of Leadership Louisville, being recognized by that organization as one of Louisville's connectors, as well as yours truly back in 2010. Tom was instrumental in having a marker dedicated, this is pretty impressive folks, to Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. He advanced a similar resolution naming Thomas Merton Square in Louisville, where Merton had his famous epiphany. Tom has served on the steering committee for the 2013 visit of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Louisville, and during that time he served as co-host for Compassionate Louisville. And for that work, Louisville was named the Model Compassionate City for multiple years, and Tom received the International Heart of Compassion Award from the Charter for Compassion International. Tom and his lovely wife Sarah reside in Louisville with their three lovely children, Lily, Lincoln, and Nelson. Tom, it is a true pleasure for you to sit with us today and to tell us your human story. Welcome to Moxie Talk.
Thank you, Kurt.
Thanks for being here, Tom. You know, you've been practicing law for, 30 years now. How has it changed in that time?
Yeah, well, when I started practicing, we didn't even have voicemail, and now everything's on technology. I mean, it has really changed. But what I've seen is I've changed an awful lot.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't know that person that started practicing in 1990. You know, what I've come to see as I've gotten older is that there's two halves to life. The first half of life, we have to build our resume and build our ego, and then all those things that work in the first half of life don't work in the second half of life.
That's a great point.
We have to learn to surrender and forgive and let go. And what I found, in 2007, 2008 timeframe, I wrote a lot of letters to people saying, you know, had I been in that situation today, I would handle it much differently, because I think we all have to grow.
Sure. And in the second half of life, back to your point, you start to experience loss, you know, family members, what have you. There's more suffering, I think, and you have to learn how to find the wisdom and knowledge to navigate that as well.
Yeah, and I think we all know people who have like one or two answers for everything. I think what we want to become is a person who can, a real elder who can hold it all together. You know.
Absolutely, absolutely. What led to this change in you?
You know, the turning point for me was, you might call it a midlife crisis, but really it was something of a crisis of conscience. I had experienced two precognitive dreams of people dying before they died. I dreamt that one of my mentors, who I care deeply about, the night before he died, I dreamt about it. And then someone who was so important in my career, very central to my career, I had a dream about a family member of his dying before it happened. And I didn't believe that you could dream about things. I didn't think time was a circle until then, until I experienced it for myself. And when I had those two dreams of death, I had this intuition that thankfully I was wrong about, that I was going to die real soon. And so what I saw, I kept death very close to me for an extended period, and what I saw was that some part of me needed to die off so I could become something new and different.
Yeah, it almost sounds like deja vu in a way, what you're describing somewhat, or no?
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it deja vu. I think it would be letting go of the parts of me that weren't serving me and growing, I guess. I mean, I think growing's painful. Yeah.
So how can you have these kind of views, Tom, and still be an attorney?
Yeah.
Because you have a level of introspection, and I'm not saying lawyers or attorneys don't, You know, and you mentioned an article that you shared with me that lawyers could be healers. So maybe you could answer it in that context or however you like. But I'm curious.
I think, you know, Jesus was my Savior, is my Savior. And I think, you know, I tell people that the highest call of Jesus is to love our enemies and bless those that persecute us. And, you know, as an attorney, I've got built-in enemies all the time. I mean, I think really the call for me is to learn how to love people that I disagree with, love people that might not want the best things to happen to my client. And that it's really an art to love somebody. You know, like for example, if you've got an alcoholic screaming for a drink, the loving thing isn't to hand them a drink.
Right.
And so what I've seen is that, you know, in the law, we deal with so many situations, so many issues that are really devastating for people, and we have to deal with so many people that we really get to practice the art of loving.
Very cool. I like that. Now, going back to an earlier time, what led you to become involved in the life of the community?
Yeah, you know, I was, first 5 or 6 years of practicing law, I just was doing everything I could to survive, basically, staying up with things. And then I went to an event on 4th and Walnut, 4th and Ali in Louisville, where they were celebrating Thomas Merton's Epiphany, and they put a historic marker up for that Epiphany. And literally, when I was sitting in the church for that event, I was thinking of Martin Luther King and his dream speech in Washington, D.C., because the 40th anniversary of that was coming up in 2008. And I just read the book, The Tipping Point, and he talked about sticky messages and telling stories. So I wrote a letter to Congresswoman Northup, and I said, you know, Merton transformed this space in Louisville, Dr. King transformed this space in Washington, D.C., and I'd love to bring my unborn children and tell them, I'll tear up, tell them about Dr. King and Abraham Lincoln, you know, because the most famous speech of the 20th century was at the Lincoln Memorial where King talked about his dream. And believe it or not, there wasn't any kind of historic marker for that event. Yeah.
Yes, and we'll talk about that. And we have a beautiful picture we'll show shortly about that. And you did bring your son to that.
Yeah, so I wrote this letter, and Northup's office didn't believe that it actually wasn't there, so they went and checked it, and they asked if we could have permission to move forward with it. And I said, of course. And so what ended up happening was Congresswoman Northup put in a resolution that was signed by Strom Thurmond, which is the part of the story that people really love. The man who had the longest filibuster in the history of Congress signed a law honoring Dr. King in his dream speech at the Lincoln Memorial, which was in favor of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So Thurmond signed this law, and I wrote a note when the law was passed and said, they said they would take donations for it. And I said I wanted to make a donation, and I met the man at the Lincoln Memorial who was responsible for the event, and he said he liked my story. So he gave me an opportunity to give a speech along with Mrs. King and John Lewis, and basically I got a chance to tell the story of,
That's beautiful.
of how the moment came to me. And you know, what came to me later was I had no idea that Thomas Merton and Dr. King actually had been correspondents while they were living.
Okay.
And had King survived the Sanitation Workers March, what I've learned is that he and Merton were going to have a retreat together. So I think, you know, one of the things I'm good at is just kind of emptying myself and putting my radar up and picking up on what's going on
Absolutely.
around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to offer this out now. This is a picture with your son Lincoln, and there's the marker.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And we have also the signed by Strom Thurmond. Pretty cool. Amazing. Amazing stuff, man. What is the biggest professional risk you've ever taken, and did it pay off?
Yeah, you know, it was connected to kind of the midlife crisis that I was talking about. And the client that I cared deeply about who passed, who I dreamt about him passing, I had to go do with a colleague to do a deathbed will. And I'd never been around someone that close who was passing. And I didn't really know what I would do. And what I ended up doing was just I cried with him. And I'd never really cried because, you know, it's like they don't cry in softball or whatever it is. Well, baseball, lawyers don't cry either.
Right.
What I later learned was that the ability to cry is maybe one of my gifts. I've got a spiritual director, and he said in the ancient early days of our church, they considered tears on a man a spiritual gift because it was a sign that your heart was open and things were flowing through you. And I've done a lot of community work, and I often think that the best thing I'm willing to do is to love something so deeply that it'll bring me to tears. And I think what I've discerned is that when the Spirit is really present, I often cry because it's like too much for my circuit, so to speak. It's kind of the energy that's moving through is so much that the kind of only way to let it go is to cry.
Well, what attracted me to you as being a guest on Moxie Talk was the fact that you have a very, I guess how I would couch it is an overt compassion, but yet there's this analytical side. You know, you've held a lot of leadership positions as well as being in the law profession. You don't often see that. It's kind of like brains and beauty, I guess, are often not in the same person, and especially the male of the species. I've found that as all humans, you know, we tend to, especially men, we tend to be a little more stoic, whether we should be or not.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing
appreciate that.
What is the best piece of advice ever given to you, Tom? And it could be more than one, personal or professional.
You know, to trust myself. That's to take in my whole life, is to learn to trust the inner voice. I mean, I'm not called to be the Dalai Lama or Thomas Merton or Mother Teresa. I'm called to be Tom. And just learning to listen to what's going on inside of me, and to follow that, I think, is the best advice I've gotten. And I think, you know, what I've come to see is that God comes disguised as my life. I mean, you know, if God's present and He's everywhere, He's in every moment, and, you know, He's in you, He's in this community, He's in our river. Yeah.
It's true. And, you know, quick aside, you know, I've always thought, you know, planet Earth is this rock floating out in the middle of nowhere, to the best of our knowledge, and we're these little folks on this rock, and yet everywhere around us there's none of that. So either we're totally a miracle, or we're totally inconsequential. Obviously, I lean towards the miracle part of it because it's so complicated, in my opinion, and so overwhelmingly unique.
Yes.
You know, if there was this going on Mars and all the other planets that we know of, then it would be maybe a little different thought process, but it's pretty phenomenal. Just looking at it from that aspect of it.
It's amazing. You know, from time to time I'll think, how did that little albino catfish get in the bottom of that cave in the river? I mean, you know,
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So it's a bit of a segue, a different approach question. Do you ever feel like you're misunderstood, Tom? And you can interpret this one any way you want.
I've had a good friend that I've not been around to much lately. He called me a Trojan horse, which I thought was hilarious. He said, "You got a generic name, Tom Williams. You wear a suit and tie. You don't look any different. You're slightly overweight. You're balding. You know, there's probably 30 Tom Williams in town." He goes, "And then you're able to get inside the walls, and then God knows what's coming out of your belly." And I said, well, so yeah, I mean, I think I'm misunderstood in very kind of white privileged ways, I guess, and that, you know, I think people sometimes think I'm one-dimensional because of the role that I'm in, and so it's not anything that's inhibiting for me, but I am misunderstood from time to time.
I'll be frank, if I hadn't had the privilege to see you talk, you know, in Leadership Louisville and other venues, and see this other side of you, I probably would have, you know, assessed the same opinion. But when I saw that side of you, you know, you got on what I call my Moxie radar, and I just said, we've got to figure out how to make that work at some point in the future. Sure. So what was it like meeting His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and what did you learn from him?
This is a great story. Mayor Fisher got the Dalai Lama to come to the Conference of Mayors, and he was on the same stage with Lady Gaga. So the Dalai Lama and the Lady Gaga. But a small delegation of us who were part of Compassionate Louisville had an opportunity to go and meet with the Dalai Lama in his hotel room. And I think the thing that was marvelous was that we were, you know, we're working on this idea of a compassionate city, and to have the Dalai Lama sitting there saying, there's been a lot of revolutions in the world. The Chinese have had this violent revolution, and that revolution, what the world needs is a compassion revolution. And to know that the Dalai Lama, he'll be running around the world and talking about this city in the United States called Louisville that's trying to commit itself to compassion. So I think, that part was very special. And I think the other thing I've noticed about being around several Dalai Lama visits is there's this idea of the golden shadow. I mean, you've heard of the shadow where I can't see the bad stuff in myself, so I see it in you, and I blame you for what's shitty about me or what's bad about me.
Right.
But there's also something called the golden shadow, which is that we have trouble seeing our own brilliance and our own love and our own depth, and so we see it in other people. And so many people, I think, can't see their own goodness, and they can see it in the Dalai Lama. Because I think the amazing thing about the Dalai Lama is he's just like your favorite uncle. I mean, he's a loving, laughing guy who enjoys his life, and his ordinariness really is what's most striking to me.
How long has he been in that position? It's got to be 40.
Since he was 4 or 5 years old.
I was going to say
so,
at least 50 plus years. Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Maybe longer than that. I mean, maybe 70 years, I think.
Yeah. So what is it like to be Tom Williams?
Well, I'll give one. Somebody I work with said just compare me to Forrest Gump. Okay. I said, well, I'll take that. Because actually, one of my best friends growing up was Neil Armstrong, the astronaut's son, a guy named Mark Armstrong. Mark and Rick were like my best friends. Like, Neil Armstrong? And then I got to give this speech at the Lincoln Memorial, and I've gotten to do some things. So, I've got a lot of parts. I think everybody has a lot of parts. I think we're all there's a chorus that lives within all of us, and there's definitely a chorus that lives within me. There's some nice guys, and there's some jerks, and we're all trying to manage them the best we can. I think I'm no different than anyone else in that way.
Yeah, my dad had a philosophy, quick aside. He would say, don't give any and don't take any.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the philosophy I've led with. So if they give you, you give, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, it borders on eye for an eye, and that gets into a whole nother philosophical discussion. But anyway, it served me well for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, and I think, we're none of us are any better than either, and none of us are any worse than either. We're all, we're all fighting a hard battle, as they say.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can you define being a leader in the 21st century, Tom? In one word, if you can.
Stewardship is the word I would use, because I think we have a fiction that we own all these things that are here. I mean, really, I think God and nature owns us. We don't own them, and as leaders, it's going to be our job to steward what we have to the subsequent generations, to 4, 5, 6 generations from now. And so, leaders really need to know how to gather energy and get the best out of each other.
I like that. I like that. Now, you had offered out some articles to me, and I'm just going to mention the titles, and then you could kind of talk about them loosely. One was Lawyers as Healers.
I've been trying to start a conversation that, in the law we've been taught to wage battle, and that through battle something good comes, and things are going to come in our current system. But lawyers are in the position where if we saw ourselves as community healers, I think we could really make a big difference in the world and how things are. And I think if we gave permission for lawyers to look to systems and try to bring healing and health to the broader community, if we were empowered to do those sorts of things and used our discretion in that way, that I think it's, hopefully what's next in the law.
Do you consider it a form of social work? Is that fair or no?
No, I wouldn't call it social work. I would call it, looking at a bigger picture and using discretion and discernment.
And one was my mission talk about Merton. You've probably referenced some of that already.
Yeah, it was December 10th when I gave the My Mission talk, and there was a time in my life when everything that happened really spoke volumes to me, and there was an experience I had at Muir Woods in San Francisco where a redwood tree had fallen, and it really struck me in a very profound way. And then right when we were starting our kind of compassionate city effort, I was driving home, and there was a tree in the road ahead of me, and it was just blocking the way. And then a woman and her son got out, excuse me, and moved the tree.
Mm-hmm.
And what really struck me was, it was December 10th, which was, it was, the Christmas season, and how, Jesus and Mary had kind of moved the trees in my life. And it really spoke a lot to my heart at that point. And so I wrote about it. And and I thought that my mission is to, really just help as things arise. If I see something in front of me, my mission in life is just really to do the next right thing, however small that is. Yeah.
I heard someone once say that, a lot of times you have an opportunity to attend a funeral or visitation, and maybe you don't really know the individual that's passed very well. If you're on the fence of going or not going, go, meaning the visitation or funeral, whichever works for your schedule, because the impact it has on the people that are there, that you showed up and gave your time, is a priceless gift that you can never give again. And so I've always made a rule that, sadly, if any guests or anyone in my personal and professional life away from Moxie Talk has that situation, and I can physically go, I will try to do that. So that kind of reminds me of that.
It's wonderful. And I think the questions you ask your guests are a wonderful gift for them too, a chance to really think.
I appreciate it. Yeah. So I'm going to come back to some of those articles that you offered out, but I want to bring this one up again, this picture that we showed earlier. And of all the pictures I've ever received from a guest, I think this is the number one that captures the essence of a guest. And I'll let you speak to it in a little more detail than we did earlier.
Yeah, well, this, like I indicated, my letter, suggested that they put a marker up for the 40th anniversary of the speech, and it actually happened that way. And by the time I wrote the letter and the time of the incident, my son Lincoln, my daughter Lily was born, and my son Lincoln were born, and my wife and I had the chance to go to the Lincoln Memorial, and I had a chance to give a speech along with Coretta Scott King. It was really an amazing experience. They said, when they started the day, they said Martin Luther King sat just to the left of the podium, which was where they sat me. And, I gave my speech, and I can see my little daughter waving her hand at me. It was really a hot day.
Sure.
And then afterwards, I had a chance to meet Mrs. King, and she thanked me for my testimony and said that it's so good that you bring your children to these events. We didn't bring our children. And of course, what I was thinking was that Sarah and I thought we were bad parents because we didn't have the kids in a car seat on the drive over. Of course you didn't. Of course you didn't bring your kids. It was dangerous back then. I mean, and that King and others like him kind of paid the last full measure of devotion to the cause. I mean, I referenced to Abraham Lincoln's speech when I had my chance to give the speech, and I told the story of Merton transforming Merton Square, and Mrs. King and John Lewis told me that Martin Luther King loved that space. Yeah, it just struck me. He loved the Lincoln Memorial. Apparently, he called it a hallowed space. And so to have like some little connection to bringing that into the world, to be kind of a witness in the room, was just really, what an amazing thing. Yeah.
Well,
what a blessing. Yeah.
This is a good time to bring this up. You named your son Lincoln.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if you might want to explain the rationale behind that. It's not necessarily a unique name, but I thought it was pretty cool choice.
My grandpa was named Nelson Lincoln Burbank, and so my boys I've got Nelson and Lincoln, and they've got my middle name, Nelson Matthew and Lincoln Thomas.
Okay.
And so it's for that reason, and Lincoln was always my favorite president, and that was always my favorite place. So
that's great.
And it's a good, strong Kentucky name.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And so this was a picture done by Lincoln, correct?
Yeah, this, when he was 5 years old, Lincoln, out of the blue, drew this picture right when I was starting the Compassionate City work. And this thing spoke to me because it was like the heart of the city's here. Okay. And the hearts are going out, and it was like Merton Square, and he was 5 years old and had no idea what he was drawing. I mean, it spoke to me.
That is amazing.
Yeah, and
I love it. And I want to go into a little more detail this time. This is the letter by Strom Thurmond.
Yeah, this is the law that had to be passed in order to put the inscription at the Lincoln Memorial, was signed by Bill Clinton, but it was presented at Congress, and Dennis Hastert was not present. So Strom Thurmond was 98 years old and put his signature on it.
And for those that don't know, why don't you briefly enlighten them
so
to Strom's background, excuse me.
Strom Thurmond was a senator from South Carolina, and he was one of the most outspoken against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He had one of the longest filibusters in congressional history against it, and he lives all these years later, and here he is signing a law honoring the man that was responsible for so much of the civil rights movement, Dr. King.
Those are the God winks in life. They have to be.
Yeah.
They have to be. They really do.
Yeah, when I go around town, it's people's favorite part. I mean, I think it shows that we're all able to change. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, you supplied some pictures of this tree, and I want you to speak to that and explain the importance.
Yeah, there's a tree down in Gethsemane in Bardstown, and the tree it's part of a trail that you can walk on, and the tree has grown apart and grown back together, and they call it down there the ecumenical tree because they would like us to all. Yeah. We all come from the same roots, and hopefully one day we will grow back together.
Yeah, we're all brothers and sisters. That's
Amen.
That's the belief, right?
Yeah.
And so this one is Myrrh Woods. You referenced it earlier. Why did this tree speak to you?
You know, it was really just such a stark image, this tree. I read about it, and if you go on the website at Myrrh Woods, the tree literally, nothing specific happened, it just fell.
Okay.
And this was a spot for peace. And there was a marker here talking about, their efforts to create a place of peace. And this tree just died right in that place, just fallen over. And we were trying to build kind of a peace community here in Louisville at the time, and so that's why it spoke to me. Yeah.
And we would be remiss if we didn't have pictures of these two.
Yeah, that's Thomas Merton and the Dalai Lama. They had 3 visits, and Merton passed away on December 10th. I think 2 days after their last visit, and a famous picture.
And then here's the.
Yeah, so I like getting markers put up, and so
I love it.
I advocated for Merton Square, but I also, with the help of others, was able to help get a banner up of Thomas Merton and the Dalai Lama. Yeah.
And these are some actual pictures from the Dalai Lama visit.
Yeah, Mayor Fisher and the Dalai Lama, and me in the background.
Yeah, here we are, group photo. You're over on the left.
And Dr. Bobber, who a lot of people know.
Yeah. Here's another one. You're intently listening to the Dalai Lama. Yeah, he is like your favorite uncle.
Yes, he is.
When I've watched him on television or what have you. Now, these pictures of your son with the fish, I'd love you to speak to them.
Oh, well, this was our fishing trip. That's Nelson, my youngest, with a good catfish, and then there he is with another big catfish when they were 5.
And then here we are, growing up.
Yep, and that's Lincoln, my older one, with a big catfish. Fishing was something that we did a lot of, and I really appreciate that. Yeah.
And is this the lake that you're?
Yeah, this was the lake where I wrote a little story called Lincoln's Treasure, where he got his bobber caught, and it was another kind of small event that really spoke to me.
I love that. I wanted you to. One of the articles you sent was my recipe for peace. Can you kind of speak to that for a moment?
Interfaith Path to Peace has an annual event where they talk about what is your recipe for peace, and I talked about. Some of the things that speak to me in peacemaking. And, one of them I talked about already is keeping death close. I mean, I think if you keep her close, she changes your priorities. I mean, I had a client and friend once who talked about her brother and sister-in-law was passing away, and her brother-in-law bought a big house for her, and he couldn't understand why his sister-in-law was not happy about the house that he was buying. And I was like, it's all so temporary, our lives, and I think, I'm a big fan of St. Francis, and Francis says that if you keep death close, she becomes your sister. So he called her Sister Death, because it helps us show that, we're all both living and dying at the same time, and even if we're here 100 years, it's a blink of an eye.
And, I've read somewhere that people on their end of life or deathbed, one of their biggest criticisms usually of their own life is they didn't take enough risk, and risk is kind of like beauty in my opinion. in the eye of the beholder. And
Yeah.
I've read those things, and over the years I've always tried to, when I had to make big decisions, I would go, now what will I do when I'm laying in the bed if I live that long and I can't, get out of the bed and do X, Y, or Z? Will I regret whatever that is? And that has always helped me with the temperance or the impermanence of life itself. So
Yeah,
I appreciate
that's
you
good
sharing
advice.
that. If someone were to ask you, what is the single most positive contribution you've made to humanity, what might that be, Tom? It's one of those mouthful questions.
Yeah, I think in Louisville and in Kentucky, I've helped bring what's called restorative justice. It's a really powerful healing form of justice that we borrowed from the Maori people in New Zealand. And I think the reason I was able to bring that forward is I had experienced a transformation myself. So I had kind of an experience on a cellular basis that people can change. And so, restorative justice really has some beautiful outcomes that instead of tearing community apart, really builds community and figures out ways to hold people accountable, but also reintegrate them back into the life of the community. So I think, restorative justice now, we started a 501c3 and now it's being run by Volunteers of America, and we're really on the precipice in Kentucky of making it kind of the default in juvenile justice. So I'm very proud of that.
There's been a lot of incidents within the last couple of years of this taping that have kind of impacted the social fabric of Louisville specifically, and I think a lot of it's very indicative or symbolic of where we are as a nation. How do you think that has changed things? Has it made things better, worse, or different for the future?
What changed?
Well, what I'm getting at is that we've had the social unrest. It's probably the simplest way to put it, without getting to or into any kind of political or decisive commentary. But I was just curious your take on it as a compassionate leader, in my opinion. How has that changed you, or has it impacted, or do you see it as a thing that we're just navigating and it's the journey of life itself?
Yeah, I think it is. My experience with life is that when something's dying off, it doesn't go easily and it's not pretty. It's messy. And that there are things that are dying off now to make room for something new and different that will serve us better. And so I think we're kind of in the death pains as a community. Some systems are dying off, some things are dying off. So something that's new and in greater service of life can come forward.
Man, that's beautiful. That's a really great answer. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. If someone asked you, what is your why, what would you say, Tom? In other words, what motivates you?
People. I mean, it sounds weird that I'm embarrassed to admit this, but there's a part of me that just loves everybody really deeply.
Oh no, I can tell that.
And there's also another part of me that believes that everything is alive, that the trees are alive, that this river's alive, that the rocks are alive, that we're in the midst of life, and that life flows through us and it's all connected, and that underneath all of it is this kind of deep love that one of the mystics said God's light is so bright that sometimes it appears to us as darkness. And what I've heard is that mystics in all of the religious tradition, when they meet God, meet this incredibly loving presence.
What keeps you motivated when things get tough? When you're running on empty, as I say, Tom.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people can really be shitty.
Oh yeah.
And you're really trying to help them for whatever that is, whether it's law or compassion or whatever.
Yeah, friends and family. I had one of those days yesterday, and I had a lot of people come to my rescue, thankfully.
Yeah.
So I'm very lucky that way. And then I'll do another mystical quote. I mean, one of my beliefs is that they said one of the worst things that ever happened in history was Jesus being killed, and that God took that worst thing and turned it into one of the best things ever, and that if He'll do that for Him, He'll do the same for us. So the things that often seem the absolute worst to me, if I stick with it, if I can do my part, that often they'll transform and change. And so that kind of belief usually keeps me going, because I think that's the pattern. I mean, the pattern is life, death, and resurrection.
Absolutely. And, you know, I've got a young son as well, and I've tried to instill in him that, you know, evil sometimes wins for a long period of time, but good always triumphs. And you can see it in history, whether it's world wars or movements. Evil always loses. I mean, ultimately good triumphs over evil. It might take centuries. It could take, you know, years, weeks, whatever, but that kind of made me think of that point as well.
I think compassion is true power. I mean, I think compassion doesn't have to move against anything. Compassion is self-evident. You know, things that like Hitler did had to be justified because we all know they're not really true, they're not right. And things like that have to be justified in the long term will fall away. So I think true love and compassion are the most powerful things in the world. And look at Jesus, he maybe had a 2-year ministry and changed the world. Look at Gandhi. I mean, you know, that is a deep power.
Very much so. Could you describe in detail a particular scenario or instance where you utilized your own philosophy on leadership?
Yeah, you know, just a couple years ago, I was asked to lead the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at my law firm. I'm privileged to be at Stoll Keenon Ogden, which is, you know, a fine Kentucky law firm. And like all the firms, we're working to grow our diverse and inclusive population of attorneys. And literally, the weekend before I was asked, I was sorting through some old photo albums, and there was a family story that apparently one of my ancestors fought in the Civil War, was captured and released multiple times, and then escaped from the South up to the North. And in his obituary, he said, not enough good can be said about the slaves because he escaped on the Underground Railroad. So literally, 2 days before I'm asked, I find out that in some way my people were emancipated by the slaves, and but for their grace and love, I wouldn't be here. And so I told my managing partner, I would like to say no to this, but I think the universe is telling me something different. So we have helped with a radio show podcast called The Reckoning, which is talking about the history of slavery in Kentucky. We've helped 501c3s and diverse initiatives. We really have built a track record before we become more public about it. So. But that's my leadership style, is to try to discern, look what the synchronicities are, look what's rising up, and second the motion, you know. So if the universe wants it, if it's going to happen, if Tom wants it, it's not going to happen, you know.
Yeah, and you learn that with age as well.
Yes.
I've learned that the hard way sometimes. The universe is telling you something, you need to listen.
Well, I mean, in that regard, I'll pay attention to, if I see somebody 2 or 3 times in short succinct, I don't believe there's accidents. I think, you know, what am I supposed to learn from that person? Am I supposed to connect up with them? I think, I don't think there's accidents.
No.
And I know you don't either.
No, I don't. I do not. If someone asked you, what does Tom Williams stand for, what would you tell them? Not how they may perceive you, but what would you tell them?
I would tell them that that everything is deeply okay. That the universe is really very friendly no matter what it looks like. So I think what I stand for is kind of a naive, crazy optimism.
So you think it's fair to say that your philosophy would be that everyone's forgiven, or is that too black and white? And a terrible example would be, but to get the point home, Hitler. You know, he leaves the planet. Where does a soul like that go? I guess is what I'm asking you, as a fellow human being. Not that specific person.
I kind of love the position. I'm a Catholic, and the position of the church is that we know who's in heaven, which are the saints, but we don't know who's in hell, and it's not our choice, and we don't know.
Gotcha.
And I think God's love is so big that we can't even fathom it. Right. So
I agree.
Yeah.
Is there a difference in today's leaders than in the 20th century when you were first starting out?
I really think good leaders today are more like hosts. I mean, I would call them somebody who kind of welcomes people in and welcomes their energy and tries to guide them forward, as opposed to, I often talk about kind of command and control leaders from the 1950s, you know, where I'm the boss,
Right.
And it's usually a small group of white men make decisions, and they take complicated situations and make them overly simple. I think good leaders today try to discern what's going on, and they try to bring out the best in people, and they try to steer and guide, and really they're servants.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Jesus was a fantastic leader, and he was washing people's feet. I mean,
Right.
that's I think what great
point.
leaders do.
That's a very great point. Do you think is there a difference today in your profession than compared to, say, 30 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it,
Yeah.
that, you know, when I started, I'd hole up in a library, I'd write a letter. I didn't even have voicemail. I mean, you had to catch somebody on the phone, and now we have moved to this incredible level of technology. And, you know, as indicated, I'm blessed to be at Stoll Keenon Ogden, and, you know, we've, like a lot of the firms, have developed teams to respond to client issues, and it's really much more of a business now than a profession. So the technology has changed things. I'm happy to say that at least in Louisville, there's still a high level of civility in how practice is done.
That's
and,
great.
And collegiality, and it's expected among the judges. So I think we're fortunate in this community with our legal community.
Well, I would also want to get your opinion on, you know, technology and how it's sped up the attention span of clients, and I guess lawyers as well, especially younger ones. How has that impacted the profession and just the interaction and dynamic to attorney-client?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it used to be we would write letters and wait 3
Yeah.
or 4 days to
Right.
get with somebody, and now everything is instant and is expected to be instant. And clients have a lot of access to resources and information, but I still will contend that all law is local, and it's relational, and it depends upon judges, you know, and your credibility. And so I think the human aspect of the law is never really going to go away, even with the advances in technology.
And I can tell you, having a good lawyer is a great thing, you know, because they can give you counsel, and they know things and see things that you don't. Sometimes you're too inside the baseball, so to speak,
Exactly.
to see things clearly. If you were granted 2 weeks right today, Tom, you know, your firm or you yourself just decided to take 2 full weeks, 14 calendar days, 10 business days, no obligation. You know, where do you go? What do you do? Who do you take with you? Money's no object. You know, it's that kind of scenario.
My wife and kids aren't going to be happy about this answer necessarily. I love them, and it's always a vacation being with them.
He said it. I didn't say it.
But for me, 2 weeks, I would love to do a vision quest. I've read about them a lot, where you basically have some guides and you go up in the woods and you wrestle with God and spend time with God and are in nature. When I'm in the woods, I feel really safe and calm, and somebody I really respect, Father Joe Mitchell, once told me that God is in being, stillness, and silence, and I think I would love to go in the woods for 2 weeks in some beautiful place and just kind of try to get close to God.
It's funny you bring that up. A quick aside again, you know, Gethsemane. I went on a retreat with my church, and I did not have a big religious upbringing. So I was about 16 years old, and we're all in a circle. It's fall, it's crisp, sunny day, Saturday, and the monk begins to do his thing, and all of a sudden this huge gust of wind just blew over all of us. And it was very spiritual. There was something going on. We all talked about it for years later. I'll never forget that moment, because there's something in the stillness. There was a presence there with us that was more than just standing in a beautiful wood setting, you know, and it happened at a very poignant moment and when he was talking. So
yeah, it reminds me of a story when I helped get Thomas Merton Square dedicated. The plan was for Councilman Tandy to unveil the sign, but what happened was the abbot was blessing the location, and the wind blew the sign off.
Oh, geez.
And this was the 50th anniversary of the Epiphany, and 50 is a symbol of the Pentecost, and the wind is a symbol of the Pentecost. And so I literally wrote a errata to the paper the next day. They reported that the wind blew the sign off before Councilman Tandy could unveil it, and I said, actually, the wind blew the sign off while the location was being blessed. And I'll tell people a better symbol would have been had it caught on fire, but we'll take the wind as a symbol of the Spirit and how the Spirit moves.
I like it. I like it. Before I ask this next question, I think you've got a book in you, Tom.
Okay.
And just as a fellow human, I think you should write a book. What the topic is, obviously you've got to be passionate about it, and it's something you want to do, but there's a hidden author in there, and I think you need to espouse that whenever the time permits and is convenient for you and your profession and family and all those other commitments.
Thank you.
If you could have written a letter to the younger Tom Williams, a note to self, what might you have told him?
I would have told him that the wounded places, which are many, to stay close to them because that's where your medicine will be. It took me many years and into my mid to late 40s to understand that. But the things that I thought were victories often were actually in the way of my growth, and the things that were actually seemed like the worst things were exactly what I needed. So they often say where your wounds are is where your glory is, where the cracks are is where the gold is. And I guess I had to experience that, and I'm confident that if the older me had written a letter to the younger me, he would have paid no attention to it. So
right, and there's that.
Yeah.
Well, that brings up a point in my own mind. I've lost some family members, and one fairly recently to this taping. And when they're gone, there's that emptiness, that void that we all experience as humans when we lose humans we really care about, and you really see the importance and the fragility of the human experience when they're no longer here. You see their wardrobe, you see their clothes, whatever the tangible things are, but they're no longer, the presence is gone. And it's been at least for me, very powerful to absorb that perspective and then go forward in a different view of life moving forward. So, if you could have dinner with anyone living or deceased, who would it be and why? It could be as many people as you want, a buffet, it can be a sit-down dinner, liquor, no liquor.
Well, I mentioned him before, I'd love to have dinner with St. Francis. I just think he had to have been a riot. I mean, I think he, fought in the war and had life-changing experiences. He seemed joyful. He was an environmentalist, 1,000 years before they were environmentalists. And the thing I love about Francis is that, he says, if your only mission is to love, you can't ever fail. I mean, he made in his life so simple. He took the low position so he didn't have any place to fall. And he just seemed like somebody who would tell dirty jokes and, just cut up.
And he's a saint.
And he's a saint.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't let you call him a saint. I guarantee you, he would have been like pushing that off because he would have been interested in you. I mean, I think it reminds me, once I met Cardinal Bernardine, who passed years ago, and I was in law school and serving him drinks, and the priest that I knew said, he'll never forget your name. He walked up to me and said, hi, why are you here? And he just, this look in his eyes, he was so present and so loving, and I just had this sense that, being in the presence of St. Francis would have been very healing to me, and he wouldn't have had to say a word to me.
Really?
Yeah.
I'd like to be a fly on the wall for that one.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Done.
Done. There you go. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Now, this is our signature question. You're our 362nd guest in the pantheon of the gallery of guests that you'll be added to. When the great day comes, Tom, how do you want to be remembered? God forbid you walk out of here, walk out of the studio today, it's your last day on earth. And how do you want to be remembered by family, friends, colleagues, clients, everyone you've touched?
This may be a little different answer than you've gotten, but this is one I've set up. I mean, I've told my children that my goal in this life is to be a happy ancestor when I die. I mean, I really do believe that my people are always behind me and always with me, and that there's this invisible plane, and that nothing dies, we just change. And so my hope is that, and I tell my kids this, it's like when that eagle flies by, you might think that's Dad checking up on you. Or when that good thing happens, you might think it's me kind of being there with them and holding them. So really, when I go, I want my family to think that I'm being born back into our people, which are our ancestors. And I'm Scottish and Irish, and we've done a lot of bad recently in but if you go back far enough, we come from well intact and really whole, vibrant people, and I think we all do. And so I want, when my kids think of me, I want them to think of me as very present and happy and well and there for them.
Man, I think that's a great note to end on. And no, that's not the answer I've ever heard for that question. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your honesty and intimacy and your openness during this process. I'm humbled and honored you came on Moxie Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom.
It's been a
appreciate
pleasure.
it. If today's discussion has inspired you, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to email me at kurt@moxietalk.com, and we're all over the internet and all the social media platforms. Just type in Moxie Talk with Kurt Jacobs. Until next time, I'm Kurt Jacobs. Thanks for watching.